Hello, everyone, and welcome to another wonderful episode on Inclusive Workplaces with Amara, me. I'm super excited to be here with all of you today. We're going to be talking about a really interesting topic, and I have an amazing guest here today. And trust me, it's going to be fun. If you are tuning in on YouTube, hello! And if you're watching a replay, you are most welcome. Thank you so much for joining us or joining me today, and us actually, because we have a guest with us today. And I'm just going to be bringing on my guest as we jump into today's topic: bridging the divide through inclusive work, through inclusive dialogues. What am I saying? And of course, on this show, we talk about how to build inclusive workplaces, right? The goal is really about building inclusive workplaces, promoting inclusive workplaces using tried and true best practices, and also hearing from industry giants, advocates and champions of inclusive workplaces. And yes, that's what we're all about. And so I'm not going to take any more of your time. I'm going to bring in our wonderful guest, Garry Turner. Garry, here he is. Woohoo! Hi.
Hey, Amara. Good to be with you all. How are you?
I'm good. How are you?
Feels a little bit weird being on the other side of the mic, I have to say.
Oh goodness, I just I had a very weird beginning, and I don't know what I was saying, but I think in a live stream sometimes you just have to go with the flow, right?
Absolutely, yeah.
And you are really adept at running these live streams. And for those who don't know Garry is a good friend of mine, and he is also he's a strategic partner. And oh, Garry, I'm so sorry. Oh goodness, I got my words crossed. Okay, I'm having like a breakdown. No, Garry is a strategic advisor and a thinking partner, and he's also the host of the wonderful podcast titled "Right Here, Right Now." He is passionate about people, about uplifting people, about creating space. And I remember when I first, actually, I got my first live stream experience on Garry's Right Here, Right Now live stream, and that was amazing for me. And actually, it was in that live stream that I got the idea to start my own podcast. So, Garry, you've been part of my journey from day one. Thank you for being here. You're welcome.
No, thank you so much, and thank you for taking that step, right? And having the courage to start your own show. I think it's amazing. Really, really, really cool.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Garry. So yes, I don't know if anybody's watching right now, or if people are watching right now, please share with me where you're joining in from. It's always nice to know where people are dialing in from. LinkedIn is such a diverse and international space. You just never know who's watching your live stream, right?
Absolutely.
For you, Garry, what has been the most furthest person that's ever watched your show? Like, where have they ever joined in from?
God, such a good question. Do you know something? My honest answer is, I think it's Southeast Asia. I think is the furthest away. So I know we had the Philippines before. Don't think we've got as far as New Zealand and Australia, but I do know Southeast Asia has been on before.
Awesome. Well, Garry, I'm super excited to have you here today, as we're going to be talking about bridging the divide through inclusive dialogues. And for me, this was a topic that we talked about, previously, and we thought this is something we need to talk about, right?
Absolutely. Yeah. That dialogue bit being the critical bit, right?
The dialogue. Yeah, exactly. Because, it can get really uncomfortable talking about issues around, race and, racial equity and anti-racism. It's, these topics just really get people feeling really uncomfortable. And I think we have to go there. And to be honest, I got inspired by Jimmy Etheredge's and Emmanuel Acho's podcast called, I think it's called Change Conversations. And I thought, we should do one with everyone from different, sectors. They're dealing with mostly the corporate sector. I'm in the humanitarian sector, and I guess you're also in the corporate sector as well.
That's it. Yeah. So my day job, where I'm a strategic advisor and thinking partner, is both inside a $3.5 billion turnover corporate, but also on the outside as well. So yeah, we're both looking at big system stuff, right?
Exactly. And it impacts everybody. And that's why we all have to be part of that conversation. And so I guess my first question then, to kind of kick this off, is, the first question would be like, when we talk about inclusive dialogues, how does that strike you? What comes to mind?
Yeah. So for me, Amara, that, it can be oversimplified, and I don't want to do that, but I think there is quite a simple answer to your question for me. And that is, how do we ensure that every single voice is seen and heard, and how do we ensure that everybody receives the dignity that they deserve within the relevant system that they're part of, whether it's 2 people, whether it's 10 people, whether it's 1,000 people? How are we deliberately intentional about ensuring that every single voice and person is seen and heard? That would be my summary.
Absolutely. I love that. You're absolutely right. It's really about I think the key is that respect and that dignity, right? It's about really ensuring that everyone is heard and people feel valued. And I remember attending a class last week on mattering. Like, how do you make people feel like they matter? If you don't know the people, if you're not investing in them, if you don't care about them, how do you make them feel like they matter? How do you make them feel that they're included into, whatever job context you have, So I think that's a really, really important aspect. And oh, I see. Okay, some people are joining us. Okay, great. Let's just hello. Okay, I have here Mazen. Hello, Mazen. Thank you so much for showing up. Thank you. Yes, absolutely. It's very, very complicated. Absolutely, absolutely. Thank you, Mazen. Thank you. That's a good one. Yeah. So the thing is, in the workplace and many organizations, for example, the United Nations High Commission for Refugees, as well as the International Rescue Community, they talk about the need for conversations or dialogues around these topics, because I think if you don't have these conversations and you just assume that everything is okay, or you assume that you know everything, you just risk making a lot of mistakes, right, Garry?
Yeah, and you know something, I'd probably add on top of that, Amara, if I may, not only make mistakes, but perpetuate the problems that we currently face.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's the huge, I think that's the biggest risk when we're in the workplace. The biggest risk in the workplace is that we perpetuate these or create very toxic environments, because we don't even know we're causing harm, or we're causing harm and don't really think it's a big deal because deal with it. Right? I don't know. So these are some of that's why I think it's so important that we establish systems that really engage with people. And that could be very difficult. For example, a question that always comes up, and it's a huge, almost a taboo, is to talk about, white privilege, for example. Like, how does that strike you? I know you have a lot of experience, and you kind of, I feel like you're more aware and more in tune, with this, with the phrase, and also the context that we're living in. And I think that you've already had conversations around this, so I'm very curious to get your own perspective about this word, why this word is so scary.
Yeah, and if I may, like, it's the first time anybody's ever asked me this question directly. Ever.
And oh, really? Okay.
And I appreciate it. And had I have heard this question 2 years ago, my bodily reaction would have been very different to how it was just then. Because I have been involved in a lot more dialogue. I have been learning myself and with others. Yeah. But to answer your question, it's a scary phrase, because those that do share my skin hue, that haven't had to deal with the oppression, the genocide, the fear, the last 600 years, we've had nothing to compare other people's lived experience against, because we haven't had to deal with the difficulties. So when you suddenly have this huge onslaught of DEI, social justice, rightly, may I add, but when there's been no real discussion, dialogue, there's been no dialogue about it. My education, Amara, literally had about 3 weeks covering the slave trade in the UK. There was nothing about colonialism. There was nothing about Windrush generation. There was nothing about anything to do, like the colonial education system had eradicated everything that my ancestors had done. So when we suddenly, very quickly following George Floyd, suddenly, rightly, there's this huge volume being turned up on DEI, and suddenly there's terms like white fragility and white privilege being thrown around. And a lot of my kinfolk just haven't even had to think about anything apart from themselves for all of their life. And suddenly they're thrown into this vacuum of fear and judgment and why don't you know this and why. And I think we need to be there. We, my kinfolk, need to be there. But how we create the conditions for that dialogue is an interesting part for exploration, I think.
So that's incredible to think about, the impact of the empire in Africa and other parts of the world, and to think that you only had 3 weeks to cover that. That's pretty incredible, I would say. Yeah. So that means that a lot of people are just not aware, are not exposed, if you will.
Correct.
Yeah. So I guess the question then would be, how do you, of course, you see the world and we see the injustices that occur on a constant basis, right? And the question would be like, okay, why don't you see it, right? And I guess the second question would be then, how do we actually begin to have these conversations to force people out of their the comfort zone, right? Because a lot of people, especially white people, they live in a very segregated society. And I don't mean that in the like a law sense. I mean that in reality, in reality, there is not much mixing going around. There's not much integration in terms of where we live, right? So it's very easy to go to school, to have like an all-white school, and go to have a job where you're in the majority, and so you never see, you never see the things that you think that everyone is having the same lived experience as you, and that's not really the case, and that's the problem, right? So the question then is like, how do we break free? How would people, white people, what would you say would be a good way to then break free and have these conversations to help people step out of their comfort zones?
Yeah, brilliant question. First of all, I would just say it's complicated, but it also isn't, right? The thing is, we live in a multicultural world. We live in a globalized world, and that's all going to be changing anyway. But the point is, you cannot have a globalized society, Amara, without there being oppression and genocide and, winners and losers. Because what's happening at the moment, if I may answer the question a little bit roundabout, sure. My day job's in the chemical industry, right? This mobile phone is not just a mobile phone. It's made up of rare earth metals, it's made up of plastics, it's made up of minerals, and they generally get extracted from the global south. So it's coming out of Bolivia, it's coming out of Latin America, it's coming out of Africa. So until we can start having a dialogue, an inclusive dialogue that allows us to look holistically at what's going on, look at all the different moving parts, race, raw materials, workplace systems, humanitarian systems, until we can zoom out, look at this stuff objectively together through dialogue, we're not going to solve the problems. And I think this is the critical part. So how do we do that? We get curious, Amara. We have to get back to that childlike state of, oh, the world isn't the way I thought it was. What's actually going on? How can I find peers in my network? How can I expand my network intentionally so that it's not just feeding me the algorithms of everyone that looks and sounds like me?
Right.
And that's the number one trick that I did. Following the tragic murder of George Floyd, I was as asleep as most people. I had the first 1,000 people in my LinkedIn account. Only 7 were Black men.
Wow.
Out of the first 1,000. But it took me realizing through the tragic murder of George Floyd that my network was so non-diverse that I then went out of my way, not through a quota point of view. I was like, oh, where do I get 20 Black men to get my numbers up? No, that wasn't the point. The point was, who do I know in my network that I might be able to have a dialogue with?
Right.
Or someone that knows somebody that might be willing for us to have a chat so we can better understand, or I can better understand why this is such an issue as it is. So it takes courage, it takes vulnerability, and it takes intention.
Oh, I love that. I love that. I want to write that down real quickly. Before I get to Mazen's point, Mazen just made a good point. You said it takes vulnerability,
courage, and intention. You need to be intentional. You need to be intentional.
I really like that. Write that down real quickly. because that's really scary, you know. It's here it is. Yeah, it takes vulnerability, courage, and intention. I think that's because it's so scary to even break out, because you're like, what if I say the wrong thing, or what if they don't accept my connect, you know? And there's this fear of just reaching out, while that's the only way to begin. Right? Yeah. So that's a really good point. Thank you so much for sharing that. And I want to go to Mazen, who has a good point here, and kind of buttresses what you said. You know, Gary says, well, he says, Gary's point about voices being heard. How can you overcome the fear? Some people are afraid of raising these concerns, especially in the workplace. And I think that's exactly right. Right? You know, you just talked about how you were able to think about your sphere of influence, your LinkedIn uh, community, and you're thinking, oh my gosh, like, wow, just only 7 people. What can I do to diversify my community and really reach out so I can begin to hear and learn more things about different people, right? And the question then is like, what about in the workplace? Like, how do you even try to deal with that in the workplace, right?
Yeah, so just it's the same things for me:
Mm-hmm.
courage, intention, vulnerability.
Mm-hmm.
Because at the end of the day, those are deeply human traits, Amara.
Mm-hmm.
And do you know what the beautiful thing is? Regardless of how we look on the outside, color of our skin, background, demographics, where we
Right.
grew up,
Mm-hmm.
we've all got all of those things already.
Mm.
They're hard baked. It's just a case of how developed are they? How much have we used them? How much have we practiced them? So my answer then is, who can you find that doesn't look and sound like you in the workplace,
Mm.
that might be prepared to be a practice partner with this stuff?
Mm-hmm.
So you don't have to go out and tell the world, oh, guess what? I've reached out to Amara who doesn't look or sound like me. Tick the box, please, HR. That's not what this is about.
Right.
This is actually very personal. Like, Amara, would you mind if I had a couple of conversations with you? I'd like to let you know how I view the world currently. And would you mind sharing how you view the world? And what are the differences and what's the similarities between those? And what might we want to explore together following that initial conversation? So I'm not coming in to be taught by you. And you're not being harmed by me coming in to try and extract from you, if that makes sense. So
Yeah.
that's a really practical way to do it.
Yeah, I really like the idea of just, you know, having like coffee conversations, you know, just discovery conversations where you just get to talk and to learn about someone different from you. And I remember in college, we would have these table what was called the Stammtisch. So it's a German it was a German language, you know, conversation table, if you will. And we'll just get there and just get to, of course we're trying to practice German or French, but the goal was to, you know, get to know about one another and to have that space that is, of course, safe, and an opportunity to just like get to know someone different from you, and just building relationships, like really real relationships. And I think that, yes, there is that fear that, oh, if I reach out, I may be rejected. If I reach out, I may feel guilty, or because those are the things that come up mostly. It's like, oh, I feel guilty, or oh, I may not understand their culture, or oh, they're so different from me. You know, but you're absolutely right that we're all human at the end of the day, and if we could only just begin to be more curious and do the own self work, right? I think awareness also plays a huge role there, being aware, bringing that level of self awareness to the workplace, and being curious, learning on your own, and then speaking out and speaking up. I think these are some of the other ways in which we can um, build that sense of inclusivity, and really create a workplace where we can have these exchanges, in my opinion.
I love all of that, Amara. I really, really do. And I think, again, I think the important thing for people, you know, watching this live or watching this back, everything we've discussed in the last 18 minutes does not cost a euro cent. It takes human energy, intention, a bit of courage, and a bit of vulnerability. You don't need to spend 20,000 euros on someone to facilitate this. You can do it. You've just got to be brave.
Oh, I like that. I love that. That braveness, being brave, and just, yeah, and not just try it, just do it. You know. And so I guess the question then is, you know, how do we? Because we're talking about inclusive workplaces, right? And how we can really begin to engage with um, our staff and employees to be able to create these inclusive dialogues. Like, what are some ideas or thoughts do you have around engaging, say, for example, leadership or HR, or even in having a DEI strategy in a workplace? Like, what would you say would be one step towards building that out?
So, if I may, I'm going to come at it through two angles. One is
Mhm.
quite a design lens, and one
Mhm.
is a practical practice.
Mhm.
So, the design lens is I've got a hypothesis, Amara. I still want to test this for someone. Maybe they're out there watching us now. But I
Mhm.
believe that any organization should be designed around a combination of sustainability,
Mhm.
diversity, equity, inclusion, and people and culture.
Hmm.
So whether you've got sales functions, everyone has finance functions, fundraising, whatever your topics are that you do as a business or an organization, those three functions, I believe, and I would assert, are critical to be designed around. Because if everything goes through them, is our pay and reward? Okay, let's check it through sustainability.
Mhm.
Let's check it through DEI. Let's check it through people and culture.
Culture.
If every decision we make goes through those three
Hmm.
lenses, you're going to eradicate pretty much every problem that we currently have. So that's a systemic lens. A practical lens is, how do we get more senior leaders involved in this dialogue?
Mhm.
Back to point one, shift the design. We have to reimagine how we organize our organizations. The old top-down hierarchical, certain people having power, that is the problem.
Hmm.
We defer. When I say we, Amara, not just anybody, like, we have got so much more agency, every single one of us, no matter the
Mhm.
color of our skin, no matter where we come from, no matter our upbringing. We have got way more agency to make decisions, to speak up, to be vulnerable, to be courageous, to
Mhm.
listen. But it's so underdeveloped and suppressed because we've got so used to conforming to that person's got power.
Right.
My invitation is, break out of that, find your tribe inside
Mhm.
your organization who's willing to have a conversation like this. There are far more than you realize today, far more than you realize, but you won't find them until you start asking for them.
I really like that. I think, this idea of finding a tribe is so important. I guess this is also um, it goes towards, also building this, employee resource groups, these, or ERGs as they're known, to again find people that with whom you share, ideals and interests, especially when it comes to DEI, so that you can also have a voice. And I think there's a real need for organizations to begin to tap into these groups as a way of testing the employee engagement, or understanding what's really going on, because a lot of times there are people who are wanting to speak up, there are people who are wanting to share, or to share their pain, or to share their issues. I mean, we talk about microaggressions, for example. I mean, it's a real thing. People of color, Black people and people of color experiencing, you know really painful situations, whether it's having their names mispronounced, or getting overlooked, undervalued, or just not feeling appreciated, or just, I mean, I've been in situations where I felt like my voice wasn't being heard at all. Like I would say one thing, and then when my colleague would say, the exact same thing, it was acceptable. Like, I just like, what is that supposed to mean? So I think that the workplace also needs to somewhat engage with its people, the base. I don't know, what you think about that.
I think you're absolutely spot on. And I think those groups are really important. There needs to be a safe, brave space for people that do generally or have historically been overlooked. And I think, again, it's a design issue for me, Amara.
Yeah.
It's like, how do you create the conditions to allow those voices to be heard intentionally? So is it anonymous surveys? Is it that an ERG group comes together, shares their experience, and it's fed back through an anonymous channel? Like, whatever way it happens, like, there needs to be intention around that. It can't be left to be a tip box, or we've done that bit of training, okay, it's all going to be fine. This is a continuous process, and it needs to be alongside every other, for me, continuous improvement process that an organization has. DEI needs to be part of that for every single human being in the system.
Yeah, absolutely. And I'm just thinking right now, you got me thinking. I'm just wondering, like, how do we actually get that, jump started? Because there are organizations that say yes, or the senior management, they're like, oh, we believe in DEI and we want to be anti-racist, and like nothing happens. Like, you know what I'm saying? Like, so you have the quote unquote buy-in, but not quite, because you don't really see the results. You don't really see the momentum. You go through, for example, you go through the design of a baseline study, for example, and then you go through all of that, and when it comes to the action part, the rollout part, you feel that the senior management, they're not as present or as involved, or so you do have this, the idea, and there's a general sensing that people get it, but at the end of the day, you don't really see the results, and that could be difficult. So how do we, yeah, we definitely need that sustainability and the DEI and aspect of it, and the intentionality, but then how do we get the senior management to really step in, even after they've said yes, but then with your actions you're not really seeing that?
Yeah, it's a cracking question, right? Because we've got so much evidence as to the value add of DEI, right? Make more money, more diversity of thought. Like, the benefits of DEI are ridiculously well known. Yet you're right, we're still not seeing the adoption. Mm-hmm. So why is that?
Right.
Power, fear, privilege, right?
Mm-hmm.
It's the reality is we need more leaders, top leaders, in this conversation, this inclusive dialogue with us, not to find fault, not to say, hey, you've got the power, give it all away tomorrow. What we are saying is, do you really, CEO, need another 10 million bonus? Or is 1 million enough and you can distribute the other 9 to the rest of the business, right? These are the types of dialogues we need to be in, who actually gets decision-making power. Yeah. If we don't look at every sort of part of our organizational structure and review it inclusively, with those people in the dialogue, then it's not going to shift. Like, if those people at the top can just sign off,
right?
Like, they need to be in it, heart and mind. Wrong way around, but then we need hearts and minds in this. This is not a head thing we need to sort out. It's a heart thing. We've got to reconnect. And my final comment, Amara, on this point, we've got so many disembodied senior leaders globally that we've all been conditioned to live up here. We've not been conditioned to trust this, the heart.
Why do you think? Yeah, go ahead. Sorry.
Colonialism. Colonialism didn't want us to connect head and heart because it protected the half a dozen white people that created colonialism 500 years ago. Yeah. So at the end of the day, the system's doing exactly what it's meant to do, but it doesn't serve everyone.
Right.
And we now know that, and we know that we're going to extinguish ourselves as a species if we don't sort this out. Absolutely. So, for me, summary message: we really need, and I believe the critical accelerant of DEI is more heart, less head.
I love that. I love how you encapsulated that. Yeah, I think a lot of times we're kind of lost in our minds, like in the head space. Like, it's got to be, you're here as opposed to here, right? Because it's the heart that really gets the connection. It's when you're connected, when you have the buy-in, actually comes from the heart, right? Because you can feel it, right? It's so important. And I think that connects beautifully to what Mazen just shared here. And Mazen, thank you so much for engaging. This is great. He says, thoughts, he says, thoughts can be changed, but what if it's a mentality? Can your voice change the mentality? That's kind of going to what you just mentioned, in a sense, the mentality, right? Like, how do you get people to change their way of thinking? And that kind of, I don't know if you want to quickly speak about that really quickly, although you've kind of talked about it. I don't know if you want to add a few more words to your response to his.
Do you know something? Thank you, Amara, for that. And thanks, Mazen. Brilliant question.
Yeah, thank you, Mazen.
So the reality is, everything we know, I'm not a scientist, but we know enough about neuroplasticity. We know enough about how the brain works, that everything is rewirable. Everything. It's basically a belief system. So what we need to do, I would say, Mazen, we need to allow ourselves, through inclusive dialogue, to challenge our beliefs. And we can only challenge our beliefs if we feel safe and we feel courageous to look at them. That is the critical gap. So I believe that, yes, you can change the mentality, but we need to do it through inclusive dialogue with support of one another is critical. Absolutely critical.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. It's really about, I don't want it to look like we're going in circles, but it's really about just getting to know people who are different, people who have a different perspective, and just being courageous enough to go there. And I think another thing, I had a wonderful live stream with Vivian Aqua, and she mentioned the need for virtual reality, for example, so VR as as another way, because the tricky part is, how do you get people to get it? How do you get people to get it when they don't get it? You know, and sometimes maybe putting people in that situation, or for example, either having an immersive experience like physically, or in the virtual reality where they get to experience what it's like to to go through a racist experience, or what it's like to go through a microaggression, or how do you feel like when you're on the other side of the table? I think that could be maybe one of the ways that could really jumpstart that heart. You're talking about the heart. That could be one way to really jumpstart that heart connection. What do you think?
I think I've got a massive reaction in my whole of my head as you shared that, because it's critical, right? I'm gonna, if I may, play back some of the words you just shared. How connection, experience, right? How do I, as a white man, understand the experience of Vivian or Amara as a black woman, and the racial aggressions or the racism, etc.? We can't talk that through the head. Experience, feeling. Yeah. So yes, anything that will allow us to experience somebody else's lived experience can only be a good thing, because we're not going to drive change from our head. We will only drive change through our heart. So I love it. I think it's a brilliant intervention, Amara.
Yeah, thank you. I just because we talked about that in the last session, because one thing I like about these kinds of conversations is, like, it's not so much talking about the why, which is important. I think it's important to understand the why, the foundation, how we got here, what caused us to get here. I understand that. But we can't also be focused on that, because then there's like no way out. There's no way out. So the next step is, okay, this is where we are. How do we get out of it? How do we begin to bring transformation, right? That's what I'm really about. It's like, what are the solutions? What can we do to move the dial? What can we do to bring awareness? What can we do to empower people to stand up, to become allies? I mean, even if it's a white person with white privilege, what can that one person do to, to step up? I mean, I remember I had a really horrible experience when I was in Germany, and it was a day. It was raining on this day, and I was riding my bicycle, and there's a bus that stopped, and I decided to take my bicycle into the bus, and I got in. I mean, normally you wouldn't do that, obviously, because you're riding a bicycle, like, and but sometimes you can't put your bike if it's raining. So it was, and I put my bike in, and a white guy came up to me and was like, "Oh, du Scheiße, nigga." It's really, really terrible slur, like, excuse me, he said in German, it's like, "You shitty black person," or something like that. And I, no, not black person, nigger. That's what he said. It was horrible, like just the N word, and nobody said a word. No one. And I was just literally stunned. I don't know if you've ever been in a situation where someone says something to you that you got gobsmacked, and you just literally did not know what to say, and you froze, and then later on, you realized, or kind of woke up from the trance, if you will, and then you got so mad that you didn't say anything, and you were like, "Oh, I should have said this, I should have done this," and that's exactly how I felt. And what was so telling was that nobody said a word. Not the person standing in front of me, not the person behind me, not the women sitting right opposite from me. And I was stunned. So, I think, like, when we talk about these issues, it's how do we get people, because racism is a reality. It's a reality everywhere, right? Because we are steeped in it in the society. The question, though, is how do you get people to stand up to it? How do you get organizations to ensure that there's awareness and there are consequences when racist occurrences take place? And what do you do to really help people begin to interrogate the way they think and the way they view other people who are different from them, right? In your power, if you will, like how can one, stand up when you see injustice? You may not even know who I am, but if you see somebody getting insulted in a really egregious way, would just be silent? I would hope not, right? So that's my question. It's like, how do we empower these voices to stand up and speak up, because it's happening everywhere, right?
Yeah, I think this comes back to a phrase I use quite a bit, and it's linked, Amara, but it's change is an inside job, right? No amount of DEI intervention is going to help somebody that doesn't know who they are, that doesn't have the willingness to be vulnerable, someone that doesn't connect their own head and heart, right? It took me till age 39 to get off the track of get your grades, get the new job, get the promotion. Like, it took me 39 years to realize that's not why I'm here. And that's what we've been conditioned to follow, is that route. Like, DEI was not anything anywhere near my trajectory of life. It wasn't even a conversation. So what needs to, like, this is really deeply systemic stuff. Like, how can we practically today make a change? I would invite every single one, human beings, but particularly my kinfolk, how well do you know yourself? How well do you know your triggers? When's the last time that you in your head made a judgment about someone that doesn't look like you? What maybe was behind that? There's got to be introspection and self-reflection in this process, because there's no amount of external work is going to help if those people are not doing the work, Amara. That's the reality. That's the reality.
Oh, I really love that. I'm just writing that. I want to write "Know thyself." I think that is so important, because you're right. It's about self-awareness. I think that's really the key, right? If the more you introspect and know thyself, the more you're able to ask those questions, like you mentioned. I think assumptions, these are the things that plague society, because we're just so wired to jump to conclusions and to have prejudices, because that's kind of where we've grown up with a system in place that feeds us with all kinds of false narratives, and so we can't really even avoid it because it's in our brains, it's in our mindset. And the moment we engage in like critical reflection, the moment we engage in this self-awareness, this introspection of self, the moment we begin to ask our questions, like you rightly said, the triggers. Why am I getting triggered? Why am I thinking that? Why am I making that decision? Right? That's the thing, like interrupting our assumptions and interrogating our assumptions and asking the why. That is the beginning, I would say, the beginning of wisdom, when we begin to interrogate our assumptions and question them, the why, to get to the root cause of what we're doing. That can then begin to help us understand, our motives. And then if we're going the wrong trajectory, that can kind of, bring us back, right?
Can I share a real life example with you?
Oh yeah, absolutely.
I like to model vulnerability.
Yes.
So I'm going to share a real life example. So several years ago, I think it was about 6 years, I was driving along the motorway here in the UK, and I saw a car cut across 3 lanes at the last minute and come off at a junction. Like, something clicked in me. Asian woman driver, they all do that. Bang, straight across. And as I was driving, I was like, what? Where did that come from? Like, totally unconscious in the moment. Bang.
Yeah.
Whether it was or not is irrelevant. It was the assumption and the unconscious bias that I'd picked up from somewhere in my youth, that's what someone else said it, or a parent said it, or a friend said it. And then I took it as my truth until I heard myself that day. I went, oh, you need to look out for that, Garry. And now every time I see a similar type of act, I remember that time I caught myself.
That's really powerful.
Real life example.
Yeah, thank you so much for sharing that, because the truth is we all do this. That's the truth. I mean, it happens. And the truth of the matter is that like I said, we're either watching movies, and movies actually is a great way of really instilling cultural values that are really racial, induced, right? Like, a lot of movies perpetuate a lot of false narratives about the other, quote unquote. and it really puts especially Black people and people of color in a really bad light. Because, what do you see on TV? Although that's changing somewhat, but for the most part, it's like really always the negative things, like the negative roles. And you may be watching it and think, haha, it's just a movie. But the truth of the matter is, like, you're kind of absorbing these images, and they stick. They stick. And the crazy thing is they impact how you make your decisions. That's the really scary part. Okay, I have another question. Thank you so much, Garry, for being so vulnerable and sharing, because that takes courage to admit that, because we do that all the time. I mean, there are 1,001 examples, and I do have maybe one more story to tell. This is a crazy one, but it changed my life, and I'm going to tell the story after Mazen. Mazen has just shared something here, and I want to quickly share that. Thank you, Mazen, again for your engagement. I really appreciate this. He says, I remember having similar experience a long time ago when I was in school, when no one wanted to sit next to me in class. It was really a bad feeling. Wow. Gosh, thank you so much for sharing that, Mazen. Yeah, what can I say? It happens all the time. And it is it's a hurtful feeling when you feel that people are neglecting you or not seeing you or are afraid of you. It happens all the time on the buses where no one wants to sit next to you. They're like, there's like no seat around. There's that one seat next to you. And you think that, okay, someone will sit next to you, and then no, like people just walk by. It's very strange, or in the classroom. And you ask yourself, what's wrong with me? You think like something is wrong. Like, is something wrong with you? How come nobody wants to sit next to me? These are some of the experiences. I don't know if you want to speak to that for a little bit.
I've only got one example I can share with you, and it's me being bullied as a kid myself, aged 12, 13. So I was repeatedly bullied by a group of boys when I was aged 12, 13, and I held on to the story of not being good enough right the way through till I was 39.
Wow.
And this was really, really powerful for me, because one of the big realizations, a little bit like Mazen, like I still remembered me being bullied up until 30. I still remember now. But this was one of the most powerful DEI links for me ever, was me as a white male was othered, beaten up by a group of boys. Okay. So I know what it feels like to be excluded. But important point, I didn't have any of the systemic trauma to have to deal with to get my money, to get, to come from a household that had food on the table, that, I didn't have to fight my way through just to get a seat on the bus. So it's really interesting, the layers around this is that, so just because someone is white doesn't mean they haven't had their own version of trauma.
No.
But the important point is, what someone like myself probably hasn't gone through is all of the systemic stuff before. So like when you add, I have so much empathy for people of color who share their stories, because they've not only dealt with something like I've just shared, they've had all the other BS on the back end. And that's what has to stop. It's just madness, because the only person that loses is the collective human race, right?
Totally. 100%. Yeah, absolutely. I really liked how you phrased that. It's because you have that one experience, but then for people of color mostly, it's like it's not ending. Like, it's just like the stories just never end. It's just one thing after another, and it's just, it's just really unending. And it's not just one part of your life; it's like all parts of your life. And okay, we do have about 2 minutes left. And I'm going to quickly tell this story, which is a story that really changed my trajectory while I was, working on my doctorate in Germany. Okay, so I was just coming out of the train station, and with my bike, and I was just about to head home, and I was about to unlock my bike, and this German guy comes up to me, a white guy comes up to me and says, hello in German, like, hello, are you Sandra? And I thought, that's really weird. Plus, he was looking weird, and I was like, no. Who is this guy? And then I thought he would go away. He didn't. He came back again. He was like, hi, I had an appointment with Sandra. Sandra is a refugee. She's supposed to meet with me. This is during the refugee crisis, and she's supposed to meet me here. She's supposed to clean my house, and she's not here. And I thought, okay, well, sorry, I'm not Sandra. I don't know why you're asking me this question. And then he goes, okay, fine, no problem. Well, would you be willing to clean my house? I was so stunned, like shocked, And again, didn't know how to respond to that. And of course, drove off like really angry and got angry. But then I kind of wrote a play around that called My Name Is Not Sandra. And then it changed me because I used that experience to talk about bias, to talk about how people put you, how society puts you in a box, you know, and how we make that mistake too. You know, we all make that mistake of putting people in boxes and creating narratives around people that are completely false, you know. So it's an ongoing situation, an ongoing struggle. We have to be willing to learn. We have to be willing to open up. We have to be willing to share. We have to be willing to get out of our comfort zones, even in the workplace, you know, to have these conversations, right, Garry?
100%. And I thank you for sharing us. I want to know where the play is. Is it online somewhere or?
It's in an academic journal, but I can share that with you.
I'm very interested. But the thing I'd love to leave you with and your viewers, if I may, is one of my big tensions personally in the last few months has been this absolute knowing that we are all human. Yeah, before everything kicks in, we are all connected. We are all part of this one human race. But then at the same time, knowing how much prejudice and systemic challenge still exists. And there's an awful lot of focus on the we're one, we all come from love. Let's make organizations more human. And that's important. But if we just focus at that and don't tackle the oppression and the systemic challenges, then we're just going to recolonize the next 100 years. So I just want to invite particularly my kinfolk, but everybody, to stay very curious about these narratives around love and connection and human-centered. It's important, and I agree. But that is not on its own the solution. We need to deal with the system at the same time.
The system is the thing that's actually perpetuating it, and it's a beast. It's a beast, right? But then, you know, the more we talk about it, the more people know about it, the more we have the power to fight and stand up against it as well. Garry, thank you so much for joining us on the show today. And I just want to, you know, I'm going to quickly share where people can find you. But this is also, let me just change that real quickly. But maybe you can talk a little bit about where people can find you and what you've been up to. You know, I know you have this incredible podcast right here, right now. But what are some other things you're doing?
Well, thank you for joining me on that before. So yeah, I've got the Right Here, Right Now live show, which is a very intuitive conversation, a bit like Amara and I've had today. The website is hexochangenowoneword.com. And really what I'm looking at there, alongside my day job, Amara, I'm building a transformational change practice, which is really all about holding space for very much people, you know, anybody, but particularly senior leaders of organizations that may share my skin hue, that know there's a better way, that really do believe in DEI and more an equitable world, but are just so paralyzed by fear that they don't know where to go. And I want to offer to hold space for them to think through what's on their mind, get it through their mouth without any fear of judgment, etc. So I really want to be that one-to-one guide or a group guide for particularly senior white men in corporations that know there's a better way, but maybe feel afraid how to step into that.
Awesome. Oh, that sounds amazing. And gosh, I wish you all the energy, all the strength, all the connection, all the resources you need to bring that to light. I think it's so important. And I think it's also important to recognize that we have to deal with this in a multi-directional way, you know, so there's just no one size fits all. We've got to approach it in different perspectives. And I love how you're using your energy, your space, your influence to make a difference. And that's really powerful, Garry. Thank you so much. And with that, oh, did you want to say something?
I was just saying thank you.
Oh,
thank you so much.
You're very welcome. And I want to thank everyone that joined in and those who are going to be joining in the replay. And thank you to Mazen. Mazen, you're amazing. Thank you so much for joining in. I really enjoyed, you know, hearing your perspectives, and I really enjoyed your engagement. And so with that, we'll say thank you so much, everyone, and be well. Thank you and goodbye. Thank you.